I'm Clarke and I am the Scholarly Services Librarian at Oklahoma State University and on the team that has been involved with implementing and now administering elements at OSU.
And hi, my name is Megan Mackin. I'm the Digital Scholarship Librarian and the liaison to the Visual Arts and Humanities at Oklahoma State University. On the Elements project team, I've been involved with configuring the system and the assessment module in particular.
So I'm going to put a link to the slides here in the chat and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that y'all can see those. Just a moment. Okay. All right.
Right.
So go ahead, Megan.
Sorry. During our implementation of Elements, we worked with human resources and the registrar on privacy issues to understand which data is protected. And we also met with the university communications on their expectations for public profiles in the university directory. So being the librarians that we are, we often ask questions about the implications of publicly sharing faculty information and how to balance that with open access. So while we were deciding which information to share, our digital humanities faculty group brought in a privacy scholar to speak. So we knew we weren't the only ones on campus invested in the answers to our questions. So today we'll share with you the steps we took from procurement to user training to inform ourselves and our users about privacy and experts directory, the Oklahoma State University implementation of Elements.
So as the library has really at Oklahoma State University led the procurement and implementation of Elements, this has really allowed us to prioritize issues of concern to us. And one of those is privacy and confidentiality. These are explicitly addressed in the American Library Association Code of Ethics. In that document, they really pertain more towards library users' rights with respect to information that they seek or receive. But this has extended in the profession of librarianship into other areas of service like research data curation and learning management systems, particularly as universities outsource a lot of that work to third parties. This is framed as gray data by Christine Borgman in an excellent article that she wrote. If you download the slides, you can, we have a full list of references where she refers to gray data as the data that universities accumulate outside of the research realm. So in their daily activities. In that article, she's really focusing on data as it pertains to teaching, but it really does extend into research information management as well. There are some very useful tools that we referred to in our process of procuring Elements. One of those is the Scholarly Communications Infrastructure Checklist, which I will drop into the chat here. And sorry, here's the link to the slides if you didn't receive those. And this is really framed as a set of questions to frame discussions with potential vendors who provide services relating to scholarly communications infrastructure. And there was also an interesting report by the University of California Academic Senate that framed some of these privacy questions as well. We're not going to get into a whole lot of detail about all of the questions during the procurement process, except to say that it was a team approach with librarians and faculty and IT and HR. IT, of course, had concerns about security for the hosted product. The librarians and the faculty were concerned about claims to intellectual property ownership, both the data that the university puts into the system as well as data that users add themselves. who the data is shared with, what happens to the data after termination. And all of these questions we discussed with the potential vendors that we were working with. And just a note to say that the digital science representatives were very responsive to all of these concerns, and all of them were addressed to the point that we felt very comfortable moving forward with Elements.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we set up Elements. From the user end, the system requires an authenticated Oklahoma State University login and is only available to the users who also have a profile, who are mostly faculty, some administrative staff, and system administrators. Faculty have control over whether their profile is made public on the web, although some departments and colleges do require them to switch their profile to public so they can, so the departments can retire their websites with people's profiles on them. And for any given object in a profile, such as publication, grant, or course taught, faculty can choose to make that item public, internal, so that only other users logged into the system can see, or private. And we like to emphasize that private data is still viewable by system administrators and institutional administrators with reporting access. So how does the research information management, or RIM system, interface with public profile tools? The system has both an API, of course, as well as direct access to the reporting database. So our access is limited to unique accounts separate from the user profile system and restricted to a specified IP address to limit access. And these accounts are configurable only by system administrators.
I'll move on to give a few examples of privacy concerns that have come up along the way and how these were addressed. Again, I want to emphasize that really the most successful approach is working with policies and practices that have already been developed by campus IT and HR. So one example of this is if there are users who are part of the HR system, but who are confidential and should not be added into the system. So in our case, there was a confidentiality indicator in the campus HR system. And so working with our human resources team, as well as campus IT, when we create the feed that goes on to generate the Elements user base, there's some code in there that checks that confidentiality indicator. And if it's set to true, then that user is automatically left off of the feed. So, some of this process has to take place before moving into Elements through tools that have already been developed internally. However, there, as has been discussed, there are also tools within Elements that can support this. An example of this came up with someone who was okay having their profile data in Elements, but wanted to make sure that it would not be available in Discovery, in the public profile tool. So here we worked with IT to develop a process to set that person's profile privacy flag in the HR feed to false. And that way, the choice to switch her profile from private to public was automatically turned off. And that way, it would not ever inadvertently be set to public. Another example of ways that Elements supported configurability of privacy concerns is with names. Of course, our name is one of our most personal and private, or most personal attributes. And if someone wants to make a change to their name, sometimes it can be very difficult for them to implement that process through HR. And sometimes they want that change to happen immediately. And so that too is another tool that's supported within the Elements interface, where they can change their name within the Elements system, and then it would be that change would be propagated then publicly. showing off some of that category level privacy here is as it pertains to student information. So in our teaching activities module, there's a data type for student and resident supervision. And this is predominantly used not really for public display of data, but rather for assessment and reporting. And so while we wanted to support their ability to add in the student's name, we didn't necessarily want that information to then be pushed out to their public profile. So here is where we went in and we set the student and resident default privacy level to internal. And that way, only through deliberate action would they ever make that information public. Also in the United States has something called a Buckley flag, which has to do with FERPA and the confidentiality of student information. And so while, of course, we couldn't run any kind of check ourselves if the faculty member added in the name of a student who had a Buckley flag, we did use the built-in Elements tool to add a kind of help flag there when they enter in that data, and mention that they are not to enter student's name if they filed a request to withhold their directory information. And so that would link out then to the Office of Registrar, just to serve as another reminder of keeping student confidentiality in the forefront of their minds.
So now I'll show you some of our local user guide for Experts Directory. This was created as a library guide. We have both a privacy settings page and a privacy FAQ. And at this point, they're all fairly text heavy, but we rely primarily on in-person training to communicate most of this information. And this is kind of a backup for people to refer to when they have specific questions in the middle of the night or something. So we hope to supplement most of our guides with videos soon. So we've tried to provide clear instructions detailing how users may configure their privacy options within the system or in connected systems. So users aren't always able to find our help pages, but they do manage to come to us eventually, either through our support network of power users or our support email address and librarians. So you can see on the page here that we go step by step through how to set the profile privacy and privacy options for specific activities or works. And we make it clear that private data is still visible to delegates, power users, is who we call the next level report managers, who are able to provide some support to faculty users, and then system administrators too. So for detailed information, we link out to the new help page within Elements as well. That's been super helpful. It's much clearer and more detailed information than maybe we were able to provide on our site. So, and then in the privacy FAQ, you can see there's a little bit more information about the activities. And then Clarke, if you go forward one more slide. The privacy FAQ, we list appropriate contacts for removing entire profiles, so opting out of the element system, and or specific components of the profile, such as grants or teaching data. So since our grants and teaching data is fed directly into Elements from another system, we use Banner, users need to contact human resources directly to make changes to most of that information that's automatically populated. So we tried to make that process as clear as possible. And we also had to kind of develop a process for editing grants information, since we don't have direct access to make those changes ourselves. And then for student data, again, we emphasize that any student information shared must meet the criteria for FERPA directory information. And as Clarke discussed, students with a Buckley flag should not be listed in experts directory. And maybe I'll say that one of our most requested features is to integrate student advising information into Elements, but that's not an Elements issue. That's more of a not having the student advising information in another central location kind of issue. But again, we try to make that super clear here on this page. And Finally, Clarke, if you go forward just one more slide, we include links to the various privacy policies for the university and the Privacy Shield record and privacy policy for Symplectic, as well as third-party policies for integrated systems. And these may not be used a whole lot, but I feel like it's just another way to say these are all of the different parts that are coming together to create this research information system and to be aware of how far their information is potentially being distributed.
There's lots of further privacy considerations and things to take into account. The question about what if someone does wish to opt out of the system for whatever reason. And a lot of this goes beyond our role. Perhaps it's as administrators of the system, and it plays into other larger university policies, or possibly department or college policies. For instance, if that department or college will be using the assessment module, to what extent does that user have the option of opting out completely? So technically, it's simple to remove a user from the feed, but really, again, it takes an integrated and approach with all stakeholders to determine if someone may be removed from the system altogether. And of course, the larger question that we all face on a daily basis with datafication, I don't know if that's an official word, but eventually it will be, and that's balancing respect for privacy rights with openness, and not only openness, but also the many complex reporting demands that universities have, as accrediting bodies do require data. And that's just a fact, an unchangeable fact. To what extent is it? How can we achieve that balance? And I think that that's an open question, and it's not something that can easily be answered without a larger conversation. There's also the issue that privacy looks different for different people. So for instance, we don't display the monetary amounts of grants on the Discovery public profile. We don't have that listed as one of our characteristic fields. However, there are some faculty who want those monetary amounts displayed because they want to be able to show how much money they pull in for the university. So what is private to one person or one entity may be very public to someone else. And the last thing I would leave with is a plug for librarians that privacy is an integral part of our profession. And so if you don't have your library currently involved with your system implementation, we definitely would have some valuable contributions to the discussion. So here are a list of references, and we are open to any questions you may have.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Clarke and Megan. Please pop your questions in the chat or the Q&A section, and Nat will be looking out for them and getting them ready. In the meantime, I wanted to add a couple of things. One, to say I really do recommend you read the paper that Clarke has shared a link to in the chat. I read a little while back, and it's a really great read about these really important considerations. So thank you for agreeing to coming in, giving a presentation version of that today. It's really great. One thing I did want to suggest is if you do want to bring through those flags on students for the, I'm sorry, I've forgotten the word that you used for it. It's been a lot of webinars this week, but for the FERPA flags, you could bring those in one of the generic fields within the HR feed if you do have a source for it. And whilst it wouldn't prevent people from using it, you could have a custom report that would allow you to do an audit periodically to just double check that nobody has accidentally named somebody there who shouldn't be. And it would be a pretty straightforward custom data extract to allow you to just do a quick cross check of those two data points if you wanted to. Yeah, it is a really complex space, so it's fantastic to see the way you guys have thought this through. And yes, I'm a big fan of plugs for getting librarians involved to think about this stuff. We haven't had any questions come through, but it was a really great talk. So thank you so much. And I'm sure that people will think of questions later. And so if they do, do feel free to send them through to us and we can help put you in touch.